And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is John O'Grady of O'Grady Leadership Consulting Services. John helps athletes, coaches, administrators, and executives bring out the very best in their players, teams, and organizations. He's a former Division I athlete, a West Point grad, an Army colonel, and a distinguished combat leader. He utilizes the principles he's developed and practiced over the last 30 years in athletics and in the Army, and works with diverse groups on leadership, culture, and strategy principles. He's a coach, he's a consultant, he's a speaker, and he's a mentor. And today he's a podcast guest. So welcome aboard, John.
Thank you, Peter. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. So first thing I want to touch on for you, because this is a second career for you, is you transitioned from an incredibly successful military career, right? Long time there, lots of deployments, colonel, which is very high ranking for those that don't know. You have to 3,500 people working for you, overseeing up to $14 billion in assets. So that's, if we translate that to the business world, those numbers are impressive. And those numbers are impressive in terms of number of people led and assets under your control. So whether it's military or business or something else, talk about sort of why you chose to transition into this, and then some of the good, the bad, the ugly from that journey.
Sure. So to answer the first one, the why, I appreciate your speaking highly of my credentials, but it wasn't always a smooth and steady path. And so there were at least two distinct times throughout my career where I thought, oh, okay, this might, be the end. And in that process and reflecting in that moment, I had to really figure out what it was I was passionate about.
Wait, let me just clarify, because when you say the end and you're a colonel, did you mean the end of the career or the end of? I mean, you're at something incredibly dangerous. I just want to clarify the end.
No, yeah, so well, there were a few of those times as well,
Okay.
but mainly the end of a career.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I was no longer going to progress to the next rank
At the
as an
speed you
example.
wanted. Okay, got it. Got it. So you hit a plateau.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You bet. And through that process, like I said, I started to really question myself and reflect about, what was I passionate about? Because I wanted to ensure my passion was really my identity, not what I did necessarily. And in that process, what I realized is I loved being around groups of people. I loved the challenges. I loved figuring out how to become a better version of myself and how to help others become a better version of themselves.
Sure.
And that then kind of, just brought me to really three categories. I could be a coach. I could be a legitimate athletic coach. I could be a
Right.
teacher or an educator, or I could kind of combine the two. And that's what got me into the space I'm in right now. So hopefully that answers the first question.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify on that. So I would imagine during your career, you had opportunities to do all of those things, although not exclusively, right? You probably had opportunities to coach folks, to consult, to advise, to lead, to speak. Was it, those moments during your career where you got exposure to that and said, wow, I actually like that. I like that better than filling out forms or doing budgets or whatever some of the other functional components of your role were.
Absolutely, yes. So in my most recent and last job in the military, I was in charge of a portfolio that dealt with the collective training for the entire United States Army. Managed roughly a $14.4 billion portfolio, and in that process was often advising and providing counsel to what would be considered the C-suite executive
Got it.
level leadership within our United States Army.
Very
So
cool.
there's just one example of that. That was the last part of my career. But you're right. Throughout the entirety of the career, one of the fundamental things we have to do within our military is constantly grow our own leaders. That's a phrase we use, grow our own. And the ones who do that well, typically, more times than often, also continue to progress up the ranks as well.
Got it.
So it was a little of both. You're right.
Cool. So that's helpful. So I mean, one of the takeaways from that is reflecting on whatever your previous career or previous life was. What are the moments? What are the elements? What are the things that you did there that really lit you up? And are there opportunities to do that almost exclusively or make that the core. So just a thought there. So now let's talk about sort of that transition and the good, the bad, the ugly. So what's worked amazingly well? What's been a colossal failure based on what some initial thoughts were? And how's the journey been?
Yeah, so a few of the things, really the number one thing I think that's worked well for me is having a bias for action. And that's a phrase we hear often. That's not my phrase, clearly. I didn't coin it. But I've really found that that has been the number one thing for me. Things that I otherwise might have said, well, yeah, I don't know, or I can't quite see the, monetary value as an example in it, but I feel this is right and I feel this is good and trusting my instincts and going with it. And so one example is I volunteer with a nonprofit organization called Soldiers to Sidelines, and that organization has created unbelievable networks for me. I
Okay.
mean, that are turning into monetized things that I never went in seeking that solely for that reason. And that organization has also kind of created a new tribe for me too that I'm plugged into now in a pretty strong way. So that's a positive. The negative is I think my natural inclination is I'm a giver.
Okay.
In the military, we are continually emphasized a selflessness, a servant leadership,
Yes.
and sometimes out in the private world, that does not equate very well to monetizing things and, putting food on the table, quite frankly, or even allowing myself to sustain the business. And so I've had to kind of go against what was ingrained in me just initially through childhood, and I think part of my DNA, and then further inculcated through my career as a professional military officer.
So let's touch on that. So if you when you're in an organization like the military, which is a big organization, and they encourage sort of the spirit of generosity, the spirit of giving to others, etc., they can support that, right? So as you're one of many, 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 right? When you're going out on your own, it's not that you can't give, but if you give too much and you don't have the basic sort of corporate hygiene set up in terms of cash flow and clients under contract and all that sort of stuff, you could be giving to a fault, and it was probably a muscle you had to develop to say, whoa, I'm kind of a giving guy. I actually enjoy giving, but it's not serving me well. And I need to make sure my business's needs are taken care of. And then I'll give more and more. Is that sort of the adjustment you had to make?
You just stated exactly what I had hoped to state previously. So you hit it spot on. And I'll be honest, I still have to work in terms of atrophying that muscle, to follow on with your
Yep.
metaphor there. The giving muscle and the selfless service and the servant leadership muscle. But I don't want to do it too much, because it's also in part what I try to offer to people that can be an incredible competitive advantage. And
Sure.
so finding that balance, I'm still working through it.
Yep.
I'm not even at year one, out in the private sector. And so it's just something I keep working at, and that's okay.
Well, and you also mentioned, which wasn't the intent, but sort of a nice byproduct, that network that you've been exposed to under sort of the being generous and giving is actually turning out to be a bit beneficial to you, even though it wasn't, you're not doing A for B, but it's sort of, karma, if you will, is working in your favor.
You bet. And whether you call it karma, whether you call it again just a bias for action, and really a bias for positive action and things that speak to your to your inner self, and learning to listen to that a little bit more has really, I think, helped me out a lot as I start this journey.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. Got it. Okay. So, what other things now? Well, you're at this, what, a little bit over a year? How long?
No, just so under a year still.
Okay, so this is really, really new. So, what are some of the initial assumptions that you made a year ago when you were sort of doing this transition that A, you fairly quickly invalidated, saying, well, that just is not so. I have to sort of pivot and change. And what are the other ones that you made that have held true?
Yeah, so I'll go with the one that's held true first. So my first assumption was I couldn't just go out there and say, "Oh, hey, hang out the for sale sign, so to speak, or for hire sign," and say, "Hey, John O'Grady, Division One athlete, cool guy, Colonel Army, leadership expert, trust me." Um, that that I went in with a humble approach. I would, highlight the things that I thought made me stand out, maybe differentiated me, but I would not anchor my success in that. So that was the first thing. And by being humble, I believe that has also created opportunity for me where otherwise might not have, or I could have been a little off putting.
Got it.
The one that I assumed that has held true is, and I don't even know, this maybe wasn't even an assumption. I mean, this is just a fact. Even though I managed a $14.4 billion portfolio at one point in time, that's in a different space than it is in the private sector. And so my business acumen, I felt like wasn't quite up to snuff,
Okay.
and I have confirmed that as well. So that's another one that really struck me. The last one I would offer that I assumed and didn't play out as well as I had hoped was just because I get it, and by get it I mean just because inside of me, every part of my being viscerally understands the importance of leadership, character, and creating a values based positive culture and the competitive advantage that that can provide individuals, organizations, teams, companies. Because I get that, figuring out a way to provide a true value proposition in terms of dollars has continued to be a struggle for me. And so I'm working through all of that.
So some of this I would say is sort of cultural slash translation slash I don't know what else, but you were fluent in Armyese, if that's a thing, right? And now you've got to get fluent in mid to large size business ease in terms of cadence, in terms of culture, in terms of expectations, probably some language. So that would all be something that just as long as you're aware and say I don't realize that budget season's a thing in the corporate world, whatever. And it seems like you're of the lifelong learner sort of mindset and you're taking that in because it's not an exact parallel, right?
Yes,
Cool.
absolutely. You're 100% on, and even just thinking about ways in which to generate revenue, and I forget who coined the term, but the flywheel of revenue,
Yep.
right? And thinking through that, I mean, I have evolved exponentially. I think even in just the last 3 or 4 months.
Very cool.
So I'm a ravenous reader. I listen to your podcast. I
Well,
listen
thank
to
you.
other people's podcasts, and it's really been incredibly helpful.
Interesting. So anything else that you've learned in terms of I've done a bunch of projects and I really like the ones that look like this. And even though I did one or two that look like that, not my thing.
Right. Yeah. So the thing I like the most is, this is, I guess, the servant leadership, and part of me that still remains and that I hope to always retain is I want to ensure that I'm providing value just beyond dollars. It's in part why I'm in the space, ideally in the space with, athletes, coaches, etc. And so, in being able to embed for a season, and by season, I mean that includes the entire preseason, ideally, and then throughout a season, so that I can truly have a lasting impact on these young people and the coaches who are going to continue to affect these young people, is really important to me. I mean, and part of my flywheel contains, hey, just go give a 30-minute speech or presentation. Another part is go ahead and do a half-day workshop. But those things, the lasting value of those, I believe, are relatively limited compared to being with a team and starting an intentional program, almost as if a strength and conditioning coach would be, right? You have a part that's preseason that's pretty heavy, and then as you get closer to the season, you taper off. Now you're just fine tuning. That for me is the ideal thing because I believe that has the greatest value on a human level. And those kids are going to go out into the world and continue to do great things, hopefully drawing on those lessons.
So I want to ask for clarification on, you said you're trying to provide value, and I forgot the word you used, but not just sort of financial value, but other value in the work that you do. Could you give an example of that?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to. I won't use her name because I hadn't considered this coming up, but she was a Olympic athlete, was a captain for her team, had been an NCAA athlete, was also the captain for her team. And we were having a discussion just in general. And, I asked her, I said, well, how much formal like leadership training of any kind did you have? Or, how many discussions have you had like we're having right now that were intentional, truly intentional?
Yep.
And she said zero.
Right.
She said, John, I had zero. I said, wow, I didn't think, at least at that level, that would have been the answer. Now, this isn't an indictment on, USA Olympics or anybody else, but it just goes to show me that there is incredible potential that is untapped in athletes writ large, I believe. And I want to be able to have a positive impact on that in terms of, again, how to be an effective leader, how to create high character people. Because, you only need to look outside the window for a second and realize the world's desperately in need of many of those types of individuals as we can find. And, my hopefully I can have a positive impact on that through what I'm doing here.
Got it. And obviously, the athlete piece resonates because you've got the experience in that space and the empathy and understand the challenges and such that college athletes face, and therefore could provide a lot of value to them. So that's cool.
You bet.
All right. So as we start to wrap up, this has been really interesting in terms of talking about your transition and what's working. Final thoughts and reflections, maybe around type of clients you enjoy working with, either psychographic, demographic, industry, any other final things that you've learned along the way that you'd say, if someone's out there today where you were a year and a half ago, just getting ready to launch, give them some food for thought.
Yeah, so I struggled between really identifying and going, do I go super narrow in terms of who my ideal client avatar is, or do I go broad? Because really, if you were to listen to me when I was just having a mentorship advice session this morning with a coach,
Right.
and I give advice to teams and all the things that I do, it is sport agnostic essentially. Now, even though my ideal client is in that space, because like you said, Division I athlete, and in many ways, the military, there are a credible amount of parallels to athletics and, team sports and what we do in the military. So that said, that is my ideal client. But if there's a person out there who wants to ultimately get better at leadership, character, and culture, and ideally is already high performing. Because I've spent my life in that space around those people, and unfortunately, and this is an indictment on me, my ability to suffer fools gladly, the people who are happy in mediocrity, is fairly limited. And I know this about myself, and so
No, but whether
so I
that's
like
good,
the
bad, or ugly, it doesn't matter. It's like, listen,
right.
there's some people that say, well, I can take the mediocre and make them better, or give me your folks that are about to be alumni. You know your lane. Like, you work best and relate most to high performers, so it's a big enough market. No need to have to compromise there.
Yeah. And so, and it's a challenge. And I love a challenge. And I grow through this process as well.
Yep.
I love the back and forth and the questioning and the challenging and the symbiotic relationship that ideally grows when things are
Yep.
going well. Again, whether it's a CEO or a coach, and anything in between.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time so much today, and really, really fascinating journey. And I love the transparency. And I think there's a lot we can all learn, whether we're new in the game here or been doing this for a long, long time, or sort of that beginner's mindset and sort of taking it in and pivoting and evolving every step of the way. So thank you so much, John. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thanks for all the work you do in terms of this space and thought leadership as well. It's critically important. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.